Hello, Seb. How are you?
Hi, Jenny. Good, thanks. Thanks for inviting us on this little chat.
Okay, so thank you for joining me today. And the reason I wanted to talk to various people is because I think you've probably witnessed it in your circle and in your wider circle that period. People seem to have gone through a period of a bit of an awakening, and there's lots of talk about the Grand Awakening and the Great Awakening and enlightenment, and there's lots of talk about that on the internet. And I wanted to talk to people about their journey and their process of awakening. I don't really like that term actually very much, but their process of having their eyes open and the veil lifted, and how that started, how it's progressed, and also how what you've done to help that process. Because I know that lots of people have gone through a bit of a meltdown, me included. Probably from about 2018, things started to not seem very right to me, and lots of things changed in my life. So thank you very much for coming on, and we'll go through some different questions as we go through, but really just see where the conversation takes us. So let me introduce you briefly, and then you can also introduce yourself a little bit. So I first started following you, I think probably in 2020. I don't know exactly when it was, but I came to Twitter in March 2020. I'd been furiously trying to wake people up on Facebook, and it was just horrible. I actually used to start getting a bit panicky when I wrote something on Facebook because of the response that I got. So when I came to Twitter, I kind of found lots of like-minded people that seemed to be saying the same things as me, and you were one of those. So Seb is the owner, I guess, or the creator of the Born Bright. It's on www.bornbright.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's BOURNE bright.com. Creator's definitely a better term than owner. I don't like the word
Yeah,
owner, but
creator.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the project that I guess culminated as a consequence of everything that we went through. Like in 2020, that was how it came out in me, I suppose.
So let's start where you started from before COVID. So were you already looking at things differently to the mass population? Were you already starting to think of things in a different way? Had you already looked into things before COVID started?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for a long time, actually, for about 10 years, probably since the last financial crash, when we had that whole thing, that was really when I experienced that sort of traumatic shock or jolt that I see that's common in a lot of people when they first come across this. It's like oof, that's not supposed to happen, and that I think for me was that financial meltdown that we had in sort of 2008, 2009. And prior to that, I was, I guess, like everyone else, I was on the treadmill. I was working really hard. I wanted to, build wealth, build enterprise, create jobs, and just build a home for my family, really. But since that whole crash, that financial thing, and we just got a load of crap because of that, I found myself kind of thinking, well, something's not right about this. Why can they get away with making everyone bankrupt, and why do we have to suffer? And I guess that's when I first saw the rabbit hole glaring up at me, and I thought, hang on, something's not right here. And that
And
started it.
and was that a big shock to you? Was it a big flip in your beliefs, or was it a slow kind of gradual thing that then amplified after COVID or when COVID started?
Um, I think from that time, from about 2008, 2009, I suddenly became disenchanted with the idea that I was sold at school and college and uni and all of this other stuff. And I started to look for other ways to go through life. And I think for that like next 5 or 6 years, no one else was really looking for other ways to do things. So it almost felt like for 5 or 6 years after I'd had that initial jolt that it was very lonely and very isolating. So you're trying to say things and explain things and share your fears really with other people. And they just want to go for a coffee, or they just want to go for a meal, or they're just going to go and get the next bit of clothing or the latest car on a lease deal. And it was just like, it wasn't registering for anyone. So that actually sent me in a bit of a sort of a, I guess you would call it a depression, like what, why can't people see? And I think that's really what happened.
Yeah, and I think that have gone through that at different stages. And I from what I understand, that there was a percentage of the population that had already started to question things over their life. And, some people have been awake since they were 18 and are now 70. And it's a type of energy, I think, that there is a lot of people that don't like authority. They don't like being told what to do. And they have a very strong sense of individualism and autonomy. And they're not going to give that up for any reason. It's some people hold that very true. Like, I hold my autonomy very, very, it's very important to me, and I'm not going to let that go to anybody for just any reason. And my process kind of started already probably around the same time as you, in that I was working full time as a nurse, and I was working shifts, and I was just on the grindstone. And I had my first child, and that really flipped things a little bit for me, because I started to look at things quite differently then, around things to do with like birth and about nutrition in the early years and the way in which we try and raise our children. And when it got to 2011, that's when me and the father of my children, we decided that we didn't want to be in the UK anymore, and we moved to Portugal. And at the time, I wasn't doing it because I believed that I could have a more sustainable life here. I just felt that the quality of life was better here, and that you can still, it almost felt like we were 25 years behind here. So it was like going back in time. And that's what felt right for my children at the time. But then it was 2018 when I had my own kind of health challenges. And then I started to look at EMFs and 5G and the health harms around that. And I became kind of electrosensitive after I'd had some treatment, some antibiotics for a urine infection. And I became quite ill after the antibiotics, and I started to look at things quite differently. And then when COVID kind of hit, we thought, well, this is it, right? This is what we've been reading about, what we've been researching about. And it was like a massive kick to my stomach. I don't know if you felt that when the COVID thing kind of started. And I knew the day they mentioned it, I knew that something, by the way, I just did that. That is not a Masonic hand gesture. In case anybody says.
You take ownership over whatever symbolism they want to put on you. Yeah. Don't let that deter you from your message.
No, thank you very much, Seb. You're very wise. And so that's when it all started. But I definitely, in the early days of COVID, when I was trying to express that something wasn't quite right, that people just did not want to know. Did you find that too?
Yeah, I definitely found that people didn't want to know. But it's interesting, so I'll go back to the point you made about you moved to Portugal because you felt like it was 25 years behind. So instinctively and intuitively, like for all my life, I always felt that I was born either 100 years too soon or 100 years too late.
Yeah.
I was never in time until 2020. Then it felt like I was in time because I was caught in the middle of these two extreme possibilities, and it just seemed to be quite grounding to me, because those prior 5-6 years when I was completely depressed and completely alone, and then I just shut down and thought, all right, well, I must be wrong, I must have got it wrong, against every single cell in my body telling us no, you're on the right track. But then in 2000, so then I just got back on the mill, I just got back on the wheel then and thought, right, I'm just going to get on with it. I've got a family to feed and things to do, just got to get through life. Then sort of 2020, that time hit, and then like you, I knew straight away that this was a moment, this was an important moment, and things were going to change. And it was at that point when I detected or felt like panic. It was like there was panic, but there was also compliance and just willful ignorance about the whole thing. It was at that point that those 100 years of either side of where I was kind of thought, right, well, this is it. Actually, this makes sense now. And because I felt like I was part of that world, but also part of this world that I could feel coming down the line.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to the point of, did I feel other people weren't able to see that? Yes, I did. But at the same time, I also felt at that point that more people were seeing it than had ever seen it ever before.
Yes, so, I definitely felt that too. It was kind of like, oh, look, there's a whole group of people out there randomly all over the world in different places. And I do feel like these waves of awakening have happened in waves. I think there was kind of the first wave that was very much triggered by the news of COVID. And I think for the first 1 or 2 months, people weren't really sure about the severity of it, how it was going to go and everything. But it was always kind of clear that they were going to try and bring in, off the back of COVID, more measures to keep us locked in to that grind, like always, that societal kind of matrix that they built around us that they don't want us to see outside of. So kind of this brings us back to your project with Born Bright. So your project is all about self-sufficiency and building communities and trying to encourage people to kind of support themselves as much as they can, to be able to step outside of that kind of societal structure that's there. And I think that's very important. And like you, I'm also trying to do as much of that as I possibly can. And the last 3 years is about doing that. But do you see that there's a big movement in people trying to become more self-sufficient and less dependent on the societal structure?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that will grow, because what I think it is I think it's a signal, it's an oscillation. So if you imagine everyone in the world has this baseline level of awareness, existence, reality. And I think when you described it as waves of scams, let's just say, but on the flip side, there's also waves of awareness. And it's like if we are all amplifications of signal, so like we have the oscillation of stuff. So the first one, we're like, okay, it's a little one, but then it's going to swing back, and the next time it's a little bit bigger, and the next time it's a little bit bigger. And it's that amplification of what we're feeling will only continue. It's never, ever going to stop now. And so I think it's almost like the path's been set. And we talked just before this went live about sort of, is there some hidden knowledge that someone has in a little cellar somewhere? I've always felt that, yes, there is hidden knowledge, and that these people who think they can control the way things go, they know that this amplification of our awareness and intuition and consciousness is going to continue. And I think they're on a very tight time frame to get us locked down before that moment arrives. But as a consequence, some of us are going to try and find ways to exist. And it's almost like, just ignore the beast, just stop feeding it. We're just going to do our own thing anyway. Get on with whatever you're going to do, but we're just going to do our thing anyway, so crack on. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a process for me to get to that point. So at the same time as trying to sort myself out, I was at the beginning of all the COVID thing, I was looking at a lot of medical journals, and I was looking at bed occupancy, and I was trying to make it make sense to me as to what was going on. I was speaking to lots of old colleagues. So I worked in critical care for many years, so have had a perspective on things that maybe some people didn't. And I was furiously trying to do that. I was spending a lot of time researching. I was spending a lot of time writing and doing stuff. And now I've very much turned to the other side of, okay, now people need help and guidance and support, and understanding that there is another way, that we can get hooked on every, psyop that they release, and every kind of where they're trying to put our focus. But what we have to do is not be distracted, and to, like you were doing and like I am trying to do too, is to try and amplify that wave, but the way we want it to be. So my belief is now, from going through this process with myself, is that hidden knowledge is actually inner knowledge, and we all have the ability to tap into that knowledge. but we have to drown out the noise around us. So the answers come when you're quiet, when your mind is quiet, when you're not trying to process different forms of information. And I do strongly believe that we have a lot of information coded in our DNA, and we have the ability to tap into that information. And I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot of people, and I've experienced it myself, where I feel like I've had an information download. Like I don't really know where it came from, but suddenly lots of things make sense, and suddenly I have a different understanding about things. And those seem to come in waves. It seems to be that people have, from what I can see around me, is that comes at different times. And I don't know what's controlling that, or how that is manifesting, but I do see it. I don't know if you see that as well, but
yeah, I do feel that, and I don't know. I've heard it described as like these downloads before, and I don't know if I've ever experienced anything like that, but I do definitely believe there is an innate knowing. There is something inside, like the idea of water holding memory. So like if we're 80% water, then we have inside of us this memory that goes back as far as time begins, or as far as we can ever understand the idea of time. We know. So whether all of this thing is just like a recurrence of something that's happened before in a different way, and some of us are just more able to tune into that, I think because of what you just said, is that we have somehow managed to separate ourselves from the noise. I mean, Yuval Noah Harari, in his book, talks about the idea that there's no such thing as bad information. There's just too much information. So if you flood people with information, then they're unable to think. It's like the mathematician who gives you the huge sum that you just look at them and go, got no idea, I'm just going to not think about that. I think that's what's happened with all the news, but and all the race to pay the mortgage and the bills and all of that. But for some of us, like you've managed to separate yourself from that. And I think a lot of that is self-employment as well, honestly. Like this, when you start taking care of your own destiny, you somehow manage to separate yourself from the grindstone somehow, and I think that helps as well.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does help, because you're not going to work 8 hours a day to fit with someone else's policies and protocols. You've got the freedom to be able to express yourself and to work in the way that you want to work. If you're doing a job that you really enjoy, obviously, you can still be self-employed, but doing something that you don't particularly enjoy. But I think, from my perspective, what I see in clients especially is usually there's some kind of shocking event, or some difficult time, or they've had a challenge, usually that's, like I said before, has been a challenge to their own autonomy at some point. And the people that I see usually is health-wise, and normally there is a event that's happened, either a bereavement, or they've lost a house, or there's been a very stressful event, or it's been a psychological or a physiological kind of trauma as well. And once they start feeling better and they start clearing their system, so they clear up their diet, they clear up any deficiencies that they might have, they start to quieten the noise by doing things like meditation, or however, gardening, or whatever it is that keeps you in that conscious moment, that stops you living in your subconscious all the time. And once people start to go through that process, quite often what happens is lots of shadows and stuff from the past, and preconditioning and pre-wiring and all that kind of stuff all comes up. And once that's all balanced and people have dealt with stuff that's happened in the past, that's when they start to kind of really live their true potential, and they start to see things in different ways. And a lot of people through COVID, I think I say COVID, but you know what I mean, this whole last 3 years, that it's been ill health that's triggered quite a lot of their eyes opening and awakening and looking at health. That's what I see. You probably see a lot of the focus on people being self-sufficient. I see a lot of people taking responsibility and ownership for their health. And once that starts happening, they start really seeing what's happening outside of them in a very different way. And that's where the healing really starts. And, you know, you said earlier something about you think this has happened before. I absolutely think there's been cycles and periods in time where there's been an enlightening period. And we see that in history. There's a period called the Enlightenment. And what was all that about? And after that, what came after that was lots of advancements in music, in health, in geography, in understanding astrology and all those kind of things. And then it seems to me like the last few hundred years at least has been trying to keep that in a box so that people don't discover it. And that's what COVID's been about. It's about giving people so much noise that they can't take advantage of whatever's happening in this time period to change and to shift the way in which we live. But I do think it's happening. Do you think it is?
Oh yeah, it's inevitable. It's unstoppable. They cannot stop it, and it's just energy. So if they use all, let's just say, for instance, let's just go completely off the grid, like for this conversation now. If let's just say there's something that happens in the whole dynamic of our system, like the sun, the stars, the universe, if we are all part of this oscillating energy wave, which I think we are, it feels like we are, then there's always a cycle in everything, and energy is up and energy is down. And I think what they know, what we also kind of know, is they know how to take advantage of those moments of high energy and low energy to their advantage. And I think we can do exactly the same. Like, a lot of people look around and see all of the trouble and the doom and the gloom and the CBDCs and all this, but what people don't see, because they're looking at the forest instead of the trees, is this: there's a lot of energy on our side that can help us redirect away from that. So it's yeah, I do, yeah, it happen. I do believe it happens in waves over time, for as far as we know. I think some people know that, and I think it's unstoppable. It is not possible to stop. They just try and control it, and each time I think they might succeed for a little while on a few people, or a small number of people, but over time the enlightenment period comes again, and it's just this thing that repeats and repeats and repeats. And perhaps each time we go through that, some of us get out, and some of us get a chance to go and do something else, or some of us have to come back and do it again. I'm not quite sure, but yeah.
And in your kind of physical circle, the people that you have around you, family and friends and things like that, do you have a majority that think like you, or no?
No, but this is what I also see, is that it's why it feels like it could be 100 years ago or 100 years in the future. If it was either of those things, I would not be where I am right now, and I would not be able to help those people who don't know where to go. So some of us are in this place, I think, to try and, for instance, let's just say, my parent, my father-in-law, my family, they prior to all of this, and still to this, were very much bought into the BBC, let's just say, and use that as a catch-all for the system. But I've noticed over time that their belief in that system has become shaken by their personal experiences of their friends and the people that they know. And they now start to question that entire system, that belief system that was the fundamental underpinning for their entire life. So that traumatic event that you spoke about, a few minutes ago, which I do agree with, I think there's a trauma that jolts people out of it. It's almost like those people who have that belief in that system are about to experience that jolting trauma, where this whole thing they believed in is not true anymore. And I think that's when you get that shock moment, which you also talked about a little bit earlier on. And it just so happens that there's people like you and me who might be able to say, oh, it's all right, don't need to be so afraid, we're okay, and maybe that's it, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely think that you're right. And I don't know if you found this as well, but kind of every corner I turn, I seem to keep meeting new people that think like me. And I found that all through kind of the lockdown and the whole thing. I even had a guy that came and rented my annex for 2 months. And I was a bit nervous about someone coming for 2 months because they were kind of in my space. And he was such a nice guy. He'd driven from Switzerland to get away from Switzerland because he couldn't go anywhere without being vaccinated.
Right.
And he said, I just had to get out. So he drove down to Portugal, and he's planning to move here still. And yeah, it was very enlightening to just chat to somebody who suddenly, and you were like, well, how did our paths cross? And I'm sure that our paths crossed for a reason, it was to support my and his process, because he said the same. Oh, it's great to finally meet somebody that thinks like I do. And we had that even 2 people that I'd sold my old houses to. That was the same thing, that some guy wanted to buy my house but didn't want to go through the agent. And the first time I spoke to him, I was on the phone for an hour and a half talking about, this was during the first lockdown, and people were still very much, no, we definitely should shut, and we should stay shut, and everybody should stay in their houses and be afraid. So I definitely agree also with what you're saying about now, the people that didn't see it right at the beginning, more and more people are starting to see it. And I think those people are going to need a lot of help because they bought into it. They've been lied to. They've probably taken medical treatment that they didn't need, and that they may have been harmed by it or not. I mean, I know lots of people that seem to be completely fine, but, obviously some people have had very serious reactions to the whole vaccine thing. And I think that they're going to go through a lot of mental processing, and they're going to need a lot of help to guide them through that. And also, like you're doing, a positive example of how we can try and take some ownership about what might come in the future and how it might play out. So how do you see this kind of playing out, Seb? Do you see it? Because when this first kicked off in 2020, I was thinking it was going to happen really fast, like really fast. I thought people would wake up massively on a massive scale really fast. But what I've seen now, like you, is that it comes in waves, and that usually it's triggered by something for a person. And it might be something as ridiculous as seeing the Queen in a mask isolated at Prince Philip's funeral or something like that. But they're little seeds, aren't they? And then they start to grow. But how do you see it playing out? Like really playing out? Do you see it being a big crash, or do you see it being more of a gradual death and then rebirth of a different way?
Okay, so it's a massive question. I kind of see it as a separation of ideas. So let's just say this. So I think whatever, let's just say they being the people who think they control this, I had a great saying the other day, the deletes, like instead of the elites, the deletes. So I prefer the obsoletes, because that's exactly what they feel like to me, like this clinging on to this way of life that they've held for so many years. So let's just say the obsoletes plan to go ahead with all this stuff, and I think they will. They'll try and introduce CBDC, they'll introduce universal basic income, they will get everyone bagged and tagged, or they will try to get everyone bagged and tagged. But I don't think, I actually do not believe that they will be able to convince the entire population that those things are necessary. Or that they are to be afraid of. So what I then think will happen is there will be an isolated event that is then magnified, because that's the only thing they seem able to do, is to take a tiny little fragment of a story, like a bat or one man who was just acting and fell over in China, and then blowing that up and like magnifying it as if it's something massive, when every single other person in the world is just going about the business and the sun's out. So, but that's what I think their strength is, and they know they have the ability to magnify tiny little things into big things via propaganda, the mainstream media, all this other stuff. But that's also dying. Like, who watches it anymore? Like, apart from a few, it's just done. So I think they will try and bring all of this other stuff in, but what they will do is they will also use tiny little isolated events and magnify them via the news to scare people. And it all comes back to this, to put people in a state of fear that makes them of themselves take their own action in the direction that the obsoletes want.
Yeah.
So the solution, as what I've always seen, like that pinned tweet, I think it was one of the first tweets I ever made in 2020. The solution is simple: do not comply. It's it sounds so simple, but it's also, do not be afraid. What you see on the news, it's just not true. Like, there's hardly anything you see on the news that's actually true, and that, I think, goes both ways on both sides of the media. Like, just stop looking at the screens, go outside, and you will actually see things are fine. Like, the sun's up, the chickens are out, the birds are flying around. Nature's not giving you any signs of impending doom. Yeah, there's a couple of planes in the sky and they're leaving a few trails here and there and everywhere, but they've been doing that for 15 years. And even if that is the case, you have that DNA inside you that allows you to chelate, to get rid of whatever it is they're spraying. So it's almost like, just stop being afraid. Stop being afraid. And then meet your life in your way. And I think that's why I get to the whole self-sufficiency thing. So as to how it all plays out, I just think over time, some people are going to get locked into their way, the obsolete way, because they don't want to give up the Starbucks, the Amazon Prime, the Netflix, and all that stuff. I think some people will not give that up, and they will get locked away in that. But I think there's going to be a massive, massive majority, and it will only continue to grow. Like, all those people that get locked away, it's not to say they won't turn around one day and think, this is not right.
Yeah,
I want to do what they're doing. So, so I think it's going to be a long time playing out. The tiptoe, the sort of the step by step to try and take control of everything. But ultimately, I think it's the oscillation. We're going to hit the other side of it eventually, and we just have.
Yeah, like a collective mass. But yeah, I like you were saying, like, don't comply. But it was very difficult. I found it quite difficult here, not being able to. Well, I speak Portuguese, but I'm not like amazing. But my kids were at school and they were forced to be masked, and they were even making them exercise in masks, and the homeschooling was just a mess and all of that kind of thing. So I also felt like I had to fight it too. And it took a lot of energy to kept going to the school and to keep fighting what I wanted to fight. You know, they were very strict here on masks. Like, you couldn't get into a supermarket if you didn't have a mask on. They've got security guards at every stage. And if I'd have been in the UK, I definitely would have ripped that mask off and really given it some. And I tried a few times, but I just couldn't get in anywhere. So to be able to feed my family at the time, I had to sometimes go to the supermarket. But apart from that, I completely stepped out of everything. I didn't go to restaurants. I didn't go to concerts. I was just outside like you. Like I just said, I'm not going to be locked inside my house. And they can't tell me that I can't be walking outside. I mean, they were finding people on the beaches here and all sorts of stuff. It was terrible. And now things have lifted. But I think if they tried to reintroduce masks again, maybe they'd be still a 75% compliance, because I still see people outside wearing them. And they're still locked into that fear, like you were saying. They're in their subconscious, they're in their amygdala, they're living from their lizard brain. They're not being in the conscious. And I don't know if you know this statistic, but it's estimated that we live 95% in our subconscious and not in our conscious mind and our present. So really, for 5% of the day, only 5% that people are actually in that conscious moment of like just being, just existing, not thinking about the future or about the past. So it's a tiny percentage of time to try and target people to be able to see a bigger picture without all the noise that they have. And that's kind of my target now, is to try and get people to try and switch off the noise. And I must admit, I do get drawn into it sometimes. I do.
It's hard because it's everywhere, isn't it? It's all pervasive. It's every single device. I mean, you can't go on Twitter without being drawn down something, without being drawn down a particular rabbit hole. But you are right. I mean, we had it easy in the UK. I'll be honest, it was pretty easy. Although I was the only one in a supermarket for like months and months who didn't have a mask on. I had a few showdowns with security guards, but at the end of the day, like I stopped fighting on ideology. Like, there's no point fighting on that. Like, for instance, some people would say when the security guard stopped you at the door, and then you would pull out your discrimination act or your equality act and say, well, you're discriminating against me. I just didn't. I just said I've got asthma, and I just went in. And it's like it's almost like meeting people where they are, because they're not ready to have a fight with you. He's just a security guard. He wants to keep everyone safe. He's really not bothered that you want to sue him for the Equality Act for £9,000.
Yeah.
But If you tell him you've got a heart problem or you've got asthma, he understands that, and you just go about your business. And it's like it doesn't. It's almost like just playing your own kind of their own tricks against them, I suppose, in some ways. But you are right. We did have it easy in the UK. Yes, there was a couple of stories of people getting fined on beaches, but again, how much of that actually happened and how much of it was in the news that they wanted you to think was happening?
Well, I know it definitely happened here, because I had a friend that she walked her dogs on the beach and the police gave her an €80 fine. And when she said, but surely I'm allowed to exercise my dogs. And the crime was that she put the dog in the car and driven the car to the beach. Whereas if she'd have walked from her house to the beach, they wouldn't have fined her. It was just madness. It was really madness. And we even had, I mean, where I live's quite rural, and the town that I lived in at the time, it only has about a population of about 35,000. And the police would drive round with a loudspeaker saying, "Stay in your house. This is a public emergency. Stay in your house." And it was mad. It was really crazy. They sectioned off all the benches. We would go out at night and take them all off. And there was lots of stuff like that. There was plexiglass everywhere. You couldn't. It was only recently they ditched the masks in the hospital setting as well. It's only recently they did that. But I just think the level of compliance would be quite high, but it wouldn't be as high as it was the first time round.
Yeah.
And, there was people that we held meetings and tried to challenge different things, but we were stonewalled a lot of the time. It was very, very difficult. And not doing it in my own language as well was definitely, I think I would have been a lot more vocal in the UK if I'd have had to be. Do you know what I mean? But here was a bit tricky because of the language, because you try and explain things in Portuguese and you don't get anywhere. It's very difficult. Anyway, so where do you think is a good place for people to start? So start being more self-sufficient and more conscious. So
yeah, because back to your point that you just said there, in Portugal you felt quite isolated. So because you couldn't deal with anything, you had to go to the supermarket to get food and stuff. So the first point has always been people. It is always about having people around you that understand your viewpoint. And in the beginning, that was just anyone who kind of didn't want to put a mask on or didn't want to take a vaccine.
Yeah.
As time has gone on, I think those networks have grown. More people are connected with more other kinds of people now. So farms, other farms and food. I mean, there's so many reasons to try and get connected with the local providers of food around you, direct to the supermarket, direct to the farms. Because I mean, there's talk of vaccinating chickens and cows and all of this stuff. So there's just so many reasons to make connections with people who produce things, and that's not easy. Like, it's not easy for people to do, and I think people are going to have to take some responsibility and try and make those connections, which is what Born Bright originally, all the way back when, was just set up to do. It was just to give people a place to connect with like-minded people, and hopefully from that, little offshoot groups and stuff would start to appear and people would make other connections. So I think that's the first point. If you're not around people now, find people. There are more people aware now than there ever has been, and you only need to find one, and they will probably be connected to someone else and someone else and someone else, and suddenly you can find yourself knowing a few people.
Yeah, and I think, like we said earlier, once you start opening and looking at things in a different way, people do come into your line as well. That, I moved into next door. I've only got one neighbour, and they're in their 70s and they're totally self-sufficient. They've been self-sufficient over there for 45 years. It's been in the family for a long time. They've got pigs, they've got chickens, they've got ducks. She does all her own. She breeds all her own hens and everything else. And their garden, you would be blown away by their garden. It's incredible.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah. So, and like, they came into our kind of life, and we were so lucky because I actually asked for that. When I was trying to manifest, I suppose, what I wanted was that I would have support around me to be able to guide me. And my neighbours have got so much knowledge, and they've got all the tools as well. They've got tractors and ploughs and all sorts of things. So I was just very lucky to kind of fall into that scenario? Lucky, or maybe it was fate. I don't know. It's one.
Yeah,
One
no,
of the
I
things.
think we should call it luck. You've just asked me the question, where should you start? So I think we should just say, look, you started by asking the question, please, universe, whatever, God, however you define whatever you're part of, give me some help. I need people around me. Start there, because that's not external. That doesn't depend on anything outside of who you are. You can take that time somehow, anywhere, find that time to ask the question. I think that's a good starting point, because I think, I don't know how it works, but
No,
it
well,
seems
I
to.
do too, and I think it opens you up to receive as well. So I had an example yesterday that I went to go and see a bath that was secondhand because I'm renovating my house. And the bath was perfect. And I just said to him, "You haven't got any doors, have you?" And he said, "Well, actually, I am. I'm just renovating this house and I've got these 5 doors, which are absolutely perfect for what I wanted." So you just have to, like you say, ask and be ready to receive, I think. And to be clear about what you want to come is for your highest good, and is always going to be for your highest good. And I think that intuition does play a very deep role in all of this. And I've come a big circle during this last few years, and the end of the circle that I've reached to is about being able to receive whatever messages from, like you say, the creator, the source, wherever it is, the universe, wherever it's coming from. There's lots of different theories and perspectives on that. And to understand what it is you might need, but how that might impact on you kind of like emotionally. So I think manifesting works by imagining the emotions that will be tied to that event in the future. So I was struggling to sell my house and I was desperate to get off grid, and I felt like I needed to do it yesterday. And that was quite a big source of anxiety for me, because I was thinking I've just got to get it done because things are going to just go crazy, and I need to be in a position where I'm safe and like everything I'll be able to provide for other people as well. And I've completely lost my train of thought now, what I was going to say. Yes, and I was struggling to sell my house. So I imagined what the people would be like that were going to buy my house. So my old house had quite a bit of historical importance, and I definitely felt like I got lots of information from my house that I lived in before. And I'd had a few people give me offers, but I was like, I think that person's going to want to rip up the parquet wood floor, and I don't want them to do that. I want them to love and respect the house. So I wrote a list of the people that I would want to buy my house. And within 2 weeks, I had a couple that showed up that were perfect. They were so interested in the history of my house, and they wanted to keep it the same, and they wanted to make improvements, but not ruin it. In fact, they've made some really nice improvements already, yeah. Really sensitive improvements. But it was I applied the emotion that I would feel when I found someone that I would be comfortable with buying my house, and that I'd be able to let it go, because I put a lot of blood, sweat and tears into it, and it was I loved that house. I just didn't like that it was in the centre of a town. And yeah. They're perfect, and they've become friends, it's like, and I think that's really important for people, is they think about what they want and need, not necessarily what they want, but what they need to be living like in their highest good, and then that they're then in a position to help other people. Because I also see this process where people go through it, it's very internalized in the beginning, and then once you get to a point, then people are open to be able to help other people. And I think you're obviously helping a vast amount of people. I've seen some of your videos, and I've just thought, I wish I could have been so eloquent and have said it like you said it. And I think the message from you that I get very much, that I really like, is the thing about you saying what is outside in your reality. And that was the same thing with COVID. People were scared with the man dropping down on the street, like you said, and they were scared that was going to happen. But when you opened your door, is that what you saw? I didn't see any of that in my reality. So I think that definitely is a very important role that you're playing, is that, how we can take our autonomy back, how we can be more self-sufficient, how we can be more supportive within our communities, because we definitely can't do this alone, right?
Yeah, you can't. And even so, let's just deal with that head on. So even if there's 100,000 immigrants that are actually blue hat soldiers that are being brought over for a specific period of civil unrest that is going to happen at some point in the future, again, that's 100,000 people that will only be able to contain an isolated part of this country, that moment of sheer, this particular place is under siege, or it's going crazy, we're going to have to put it in curfew, that will be all over the news. There'll be one place in one part of the country, and they might stick a few vans around here and there, but what I'm saying is it's amplification of a single bad thing that puts you in a state of fear. But the reality is there might only be 100,000 immigrants. There's still 60 million people in this country. And at some point, there will be a moment where people just won't stand for it anymore. And I think that is part of the oscillation. It's part of the period. I mean, I don't know what the periods are that follow the Enlightenment period or that preceded it, but maybe there was a chaos period that comes before or after Enlightenment. I still think we will go through that. But coming back to self-sufficiency and autonomy, if we are able to influence the things in our own lives, reconnect with that greater power that we ask for help, and bring people together, hopefully we can ride that storm as a group of people just getting through their life, as our ancestors have done hundreds and hundreds of times before. We have not had this happen to us before. You know, we've overcome in the past and we will overcome again. And I think that's what people need to remember. All the fear is fear, but we're still here.
Yeah, exactly. And I see a resurgence of old knowledge again, like from before. And actually, when you look at things in terms of history, things have only really been in the last 150 years where things have advanced. So the Industrial Revolution hasn't been that long. And now we're going obviously into another kind of revolution now with the AI and everything. And there is some fear from my side about that. But I also think we are getting to the point where people are going to say, well, hang on a minute, do we not need to kind of try and pull this back, or how can we make sure that this does not turn around and bite us on the arse? Like, I think the internet was partly for to be able to control what is happening, and they have better information and all of that kind of thing, but also it's kind of shot themselves in the foot at the same time, because now there's a vast amount of information on there. Like, for example, if you want to grow a potato, you can go and Google how to grow a potato. But I will say, for anybody that's listening to this, that you have a very good resource, don't you, on your website, or the USB drive that's got lots of survival books and resources on there that I think that would be a very good idea, either buy books or a situation that you're able to get that information. But I think that's a very good idea. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all public domain information. You can or books that are out of copyright and stuff, but the old books. See, so what I've learned also is that you can't pick up a book that was printed after 1949 that actually tells the truth. Or it almost feels like that. It's almost like you have to go back like before 1920 to actually access some information that is perhaps not written or positioned in such a way that takes you away from certain things. So the older the book you can get hold of, the truer the information seems to be. So a lot of the books on that USB drive on the website are out of print books that are just like, they're just old books, and there's like hundreds and hundreds on there. So things like grown, like repairing knives, sewing, basically everything you could need should everything just go kaput. And as we see now, like with the whole re-editing of some of the Roald Dahl books, like changing the characterizations and all these reprints, like when we go from actual books to digital, nothing's going to be real anymore. And then that brings in the AI. So every single newsreader, every single world leader, they're probably not even going to be real. So no. The point is, come back to what's real. Yeah. And the people around you are real. And I think in that is the big answer for everything.
Yeah, and I do think that people are finding old knowledge again, for sure. Like, I definitely have seen a big resurgence in people looking at herbal remedies, and dandelions are everywhere and that kind of thing. It's really good because people are starting to see things in a different way. And like you said, with non-compliance is the key. Is that if people start stepping away from pharma, which I think they are doing, and just as a something to say that you should always do that under guidance and carefully. But once they step up, farmer will start having to change, and they'll start having to look at different things, and new businesses and new kind of enterprises will start to come up. And I do see a lot of people that have, I'm looking at different people's websites and stuff like that, a lot of them were created in 2020 when people had that time to sit and to really go inside. And there's definitely been lots of good things that have come out of this whole process. I feel a better person. I feel a more grounded, rounded, more wise person than I did a few years ago, for sure. And it's not been easy. It's been quite ugly for some people, I think, going through this process. And I definitely had moments where I didn't know what I was doing, and did I want to carry on with all of, do you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, my goal was to just try and be as secure as I can be for whatever might come. And I think for anybody listening to this is to start to think about how you'd be able to kind of support yourself, at least for a few weeks, right? Don't you think? I mean, the goal is forever, and my goal is to fill my freezer and to have lots of food stored and, you know, as much as I can. But some people don't have that opportunity of having a garden or having available space to grow or to store food. But I think for me, there's a bit of comfort in just having a bit of cash, having a bit of food supply in case things do get a bit difficult. And like you said earlier as well, having a community of people and ways to contact them if, you know, for any reason the electronic kind of internet system goes down, that we've got those resources to be able to help us. I mean, at one point, probably like you, I was packing a grab bag just in case anything might happen. And I'd already stored up loads of food and stuff like that. I've eaten most of it now, and I haven't really replaced it. And I've kind of relaxed a little bit about that. But what do you think about that, about having like an emergency supply stash grab bag that you might need to run away with? Do you think that's just a bit over the top?
No, it's not. It's not over the top. I mean, I don't have a grab bag. There's not something in my like room that I would just be able to pick up and go. But I have got food. We've got a whole store of food packed away for, because the way I see it, like they can't turn the electronic grid off. Like because the whole system is built on it. Their entire control grid. I mean, they're shutting down banks. You can't pay cash. You need to scan in everywhere. Everything is connected to the grid. So if they shut that down, they'll lose control. They'll lose total control. So I can't see them doing that. I can see them doing that for a short time to scare people into this state of fear and panic, and then they can come along and give you a solution. Oh, we've got a solution to this. But it's not a long-term thing. But if it does happen, this is also what I think. I think these obsoletes are very good at pretending they control the events of the day. Let's say there's some cosmic knowledge that there's some radiation from the sun going to wipe out all the electronic things on Earth. If the alternative media is being seeded now with stories that Klaus Schwab is going to shut down the internet, but it's actually got nothing to do with him, it's just part of this natural cycle that comes from the cosmos, because that is our upgrade link, our connection to whatever is greater, then they take ownership. We give them power because we think they're the ones who've done it. Like Bill Gates creating mosquitoes that can block out the sun. What if that's just volcanic ash going into the stratosphere that is blocking the sun as a consequence of cosmic cycles? But they're very good at taking ownership over things that I think might be part of natural cycles. So again, come back to being real. And yes, as part of being real, have a store of food for a couple of weeks at least. Have people around you that you can pick up a phone to. Have a written book, a phone book of, in the UK, if you had a landline, that if there was ever a power cut, the landline would not get shut down because it runs on its own power line. It has like a 5-volt power line that powers the landline system. So if you have that, then you also have ways to stay in touch with people. Be prepared, but do you I think there's a Bible passage jumping in my head now, and it goes something like this: today's troubles. Don't worry about today's troubles because tomorrow's troubles are enough.
Yeah.
It's almost like just do your thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we have to just live a day by day kind of process and just observe what's going on kind of in our reality, and try and step away from the fear-based programming that they're obviously so keen on using to try and get people fear and anger. That, you know, the whole trans thing that's happening at the moment with the trans agenda is getting people very angry, isn't it? And I do believe that there is an agenda there, and I do think that people should be pushing back against it. But the real revolution happens in your own home, right? So I've got 2 boys, and for them it's quite prevalent in their, you know, they've got children in their class that identify as gender neutral and all that.
Cool.
So, but for me, the education starts with them, right? It's I'm the one that's in control of what they're watching, what they're seeing. Well, not in control, but, you know, I have an eye on it. And also counteracting what information they're receiving and just grounding them as much as possible, really. It's tough. How old are your kids?
So they are, don't really want to give specific ages.
Oh,
but
okay, no, don't.
They're both at school age, and my oldest is now faced with all of that kind of propaganda. So I've been fortunate in some ways that I was aware of this for a long time. So I've had time to almost like educate, reverse engineer what I could see coming down the line. And I think this is why traditional values, like, you know, they are important. I know people will say, but it's old fashioned and all this other stuff. Yes, it might be, but it's still important. It's still important that children have, I mean, those traditional values were important because you could correlate the things that are happening now, the numbers of children self-harming in mental health situations, or having not knowing who to or what to identify as. You can correlate those things with, one, the introduction of all this social media nonsense, and 2, this agenda, which I totally agree is a planned agenda to dehumanize and degenderize and remove the connection that people have to the creator. Because when all of those things are gone, there is a massive void in that person's soul, which gets filled with all this rainbow nonsense. And I'm sorry, like, nothing wrong if you whatever you do in your own time, that is up to you. Just do not, like, live your life however you see, but do not force that onto children. And I think, but there's a big pushback against all of that.
Yeah, I think there is.
I mean, even so my son will send me like a message, or he'll tell me, "Oh, Dad, I saw this today. It's crazy, isn't it?" And, you know, so it's not a lost cause. But again, the alternative media is really good at magnifying that.
Yeah, no, exactly. So they're putting much more of a spotlight on it. I was thinking that today because I watched, there was a video that was a trans fit. I always get it mixed up, but it was a man that had transitioned into being a female. And he was saying that he wanted to be the first trans female to have a womb implanted so that he could get pregnant and have an abortion. But that had something like 1.2 million views because people are obviously sharing it, but they're sharing it to say, like, the negative side of it, but it's still getting shared. It's still out there in the ether. And that's kind of driving what people are looking at. And at some point, someone's going to look at it and identify with it. And, you know, people that are anti it are actually pushing it because, like you say, they're magnifying it. The alternative media are kind of making it a much bigger issue than it is. And, you know, the youth, traditionally through our youth and through the youth from before, they like to kick back, right? So if they think that it's something that they can, that will allow them to kind of kick back and be a bit individual and unique and different, then they're going to join onto that, you know? It's just another kind of thing that they're highlighting to push, but it is definitely, it's a concern. I mean, like I say, I've got boys and they're very boys. I don't have any concerns about that, but they're definitely seeing it in their kind of circle. You know, there's definitely kids that are going through it in there.
I actually see it totally honestly as the biggest threat to my children and the children of my children's age, because far greater threat than COVID or climate change, or I mean, they're not even real. Let's just say that they almost made up, propagandized things. But this psychological attack, that is real, and that's why these children need to have good structure around them. And I don't know how you solve that, because that's a problem that's been generations in the making, and it's probably going to take a generation to solve, like having people like you and me and my friends raising our children in ways that can, somehow combat that. But it does feel like there's going to be a lost generation, the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think
not all of them, just maybe a small portion, small portion.
But then there's always a small portion that's lost, I think, as well, isn't it? Yeah. And they're the ones that aren't probably getting very good guidance at home, or they're being raised by their phones, or they're being raised by social media, and they're not, they're not understanding that. And also, I think that they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot again a little bit, because they're saying that we should accept it and that it's normal and that we should include everybody, and that it doesn't matter if they want to go through gender affirming surgery and all of that kind of thing. But at the same time, there's got to be gatekeepers that are kind of protecting those children as well, because they're the ones that are really suffering. Why do children feel like they're not the same gender that they were born with? Why is that? I'm sure there's lots of different reasons, probably physiological and psychological and emotional, but why are we not teaching our children to just love themselves as who they are, and that their gender doesn't define them? And actually what they're doing by saying that they want their gender changing and defining it, they're kind of, it just doesn't seem right. It's weird, isn't it? It's kind of like they're not actually achieving what they want to achieve, because they're saying that they want inclusivity, but at the same time, they're not accepting themselves as who they were in the first place. I know that there are people that really truly do feel like they are trapped in the wrong body, but what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of people regretting their surgery, and they're also then like transitioning back to how they were biologically born. And I think that movement will just continue to grow, and then maybe it'll burn out a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
teenage years are tricky, aren't they?
They are, and I think we're back on the oscillator. We're back on that scale of waves of things happening, but it is a perverse inversion, and it is, it seems more than likely that it's driven by all of this social media stuff, which effectively is being driven by the algorithm, because it's just a program that is giving people the information that they want to see. And then we get into the bigger question, well, who's creating the algorithm? Who is driving that? And that's when I always end up taking myself to that place where, look, I must be in this battle for good and evil, because I know that's evil, that's wrong. It's the opposite of what I am. So I know I am supposed to be against that. So all I can do is do things that I feel will protect my children and the children that I interact with from that. And I do sense, though, that amount of people who are feeling that way is also growing. The same way that this resistance to all of this other globalist bullshit is growing, I do think it's all leading us to a place where there's going to be a huge point of chaos, and then we'll start to turn things around. But I don't think it's going to be quick, honestly.
No. Me too. Like I said, I thought that it was going to be quick at the beginning. I was kind of thinking that there'd be some massive event that would just suddenly everybody would walk out their doors in the morning and think of, things in a different way. But it's been it's like a drip.
Yeah. And I think that is the initial reaction, though, because when you mentioned there, how do you help people that are suddenly they suddenly have that traumatic event? It snaps them out of the matrix, let's just call it, and then they don't know what to do, and the first reaction is fear, and they expect all of this stuff they've just consumed to happen overnight, and then they will go and get the bug out bags, they will go and get all of this crossbows and all of this other stuff, and I think that's the first reaction, because that is our natural instinct.
Survival.
We are in danger. We are in danger. How do we protect ourselves from this danger? So then we do this, we close ranks, and we do this thing, and then it doesn't happen, and it takes time and time. So you almost have stages, like there's a meme, isn't there, that goes around, the stages of awakening, and the first one is fear or grief, then fear, then anger. So a lot of people are in the anger stage now where, come on, let's sign petitions, let's fix things and get out on the streets. And I think that anger stage is going to be quite long. And then after the anger stage, you kind of, I guess where I am, I'm not angry about it anymore because I just see it all as an opportunity. It's all because all of this anger, all of this fear, it's all energy.
Yeah, and it's feeding.
But if you can direct that in such a way towards things that protect children from this transgender agenda, or but it takes those beacons, people like you and me and anyone else who has a platform or whatever, to just stand up and somehow lead a little bit by example and kind of say, it's okay, you don't have to worry, perhaps you should look at this or do this, and maybe we can just kind of like the idea in Tai Chi or Taoism, which is what I studied when I was younger. It's just redirecting energy. Like it's all energy, and I think we can do that. I think we can do that.
Definitely, and I think that if you look at it as well as part of the energy systems like you do, the fear is kind of a very low vibratory energy that's in our root. And the way I see people managing this process is by becoming more grounded. And not just saying going outside with bare feet, but doing all the things that make you more connected to what we've got around us. And I definitely see that is happening. You're seeing lots more people sharing pictures of them with their feet on the ground, or gardening, or doing stuff that has you in that conscious moment where you're just interacting with what's around you. And I from my perspective, a lot of my work that I try and do with people when they're going through this kind of meltdown, I'll say it's a bit of a meltdown because it's like a falling down, it's like a tower moment. Everything falls down and then they've got to build it up again. And that reconnection to earth and reconnection to the source and all of that kind of thing is so important, I think. And where are we?
Yeah, we're about an hour and we're just about finished. But what you just said is so important, because when you fall down and you lose everything, then you can build yourself back up again into something better. So this is why I can't see everything that's happening as a bad thing, because the people that are able to build themselves back up are going to come back better, and they're going to come back stronger. And that is then going to amplify that signal over and over again, which is why I think we're all right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just as a final point from me is that what we focus our energy on is where it will grow, right? So it's so important that we don't keep focusing our energy on all the negative fear-based programming that we're seeing, and we try to continue to be that beacon of light and try and help direct people in a positive, healthy way. Because I do see that lots of people, when they go through this crisis point, they drink more, they probably use substances more, they do engage in behaviours that probably they wouldn't normally engage in while they're kind of breaking down, and then they build themselves up again. But definitely it's kind of like a bit of a resurrection, isn't it, of society, I think.
You could say it was needed, but it's our job. Let's amplify the good stuff. Let's amplify the positive change, because if we do that, then it'll grow from there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to not take up any more of your time, Seb. So thank you so much for that very enlightening conversation and sharing your wisdom.
That's all right, it was a pleasure.
You have such a good reading voice, like a good voice for sharing your knowledge. Definitely. So finally, just tell whoever's watching where we can find you again, if they want to find your resources.
So I am most active on Twitter. It's the Corona Cure _. And that is corona as in the mind, because it's the cure of the mind, not the cure of the disease. And also the website, which is at bornbright.com, BOURNE, bright. Born as in the journey to somewhere brighter, because that is where we are heading. And that has lots of information about self-sufficiency and how you can take ownership over some of these things in your life, and hopefully influence others to do the same.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, thank you very much, Seb. It's really nice. I think we could have talked for quite a long time.
Yeah, we probably could, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Okay, thank you very much, Seb. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Have a nice rest of the week.
It was nice.
Take
Lovely
care.
meeting you.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.